back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City building and code consulting firm. Today, I have the privilege of having Nicole Campo back from a previous episode. She's currently now the Senior Advisor for Land Use Planning at Langan Engineering. Nicole, welcome back.
Thank you, Sisto.
It's great to have you back. Nicole, you've worked on both sides of the land use world as an urban planner. You worked on the public side and the private side. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing these days at Langan.
Sure. Yeah, most of my career was in New York City government. I had about 12 years at city planning, and then my last role with the city was as a VP of land use at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. While I was there, and in previous roles, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of different firms, lots of engineering firms, architects, attorneys, and I had just always had a wonderful experience working with Langan. I felt that they were always at the top of their game, and I never really had to use my own expertise to handhold them, through any of the processes. So um, for various reasons, I felt it was time for me to make my next move, and I spoke to some of the folks I knew at Langan, and I started this role a little over a year and a half ago,
Wow.
as the senior advisor for our land use planning practice. Um, and so I can tell you a little bit more about that. But traditionally, Langan has had a small land use planning team to help support projects coming into Langan that would need environmental review, typically city seeker, CEQR, and then sometimes state seeker and federal level environmental review, which is NEPA. Our team has tripled in size in the
Wow.
past year and a half, 2 years. So that's in the New York City office. And if for those who understand environmental review, there's a lot of sort of specialty analyses that could be required in traffic or air quality, natural resources, shadows, things like that. So we pretty much have all of that in house. So it's a great place for
Yeah,
somebody
it's
like
a it's a and it's a
Sure.
one-stop shop, right?
Right, right.
And one of the things is that I'm biased to Langan. I've
Mhm.
worked with the firm, for a couple of decades, and they have always, in my opinion, you said it best. If you were on the other side of it, you always realized that there wasn't a lot of hand holding when
Yeah.
you're in the entitlement process of when you work with Langan and you meet with the engineers or any of the staff. They're always on their game. So,
Mhm.
kudos to you because you're on your game and you just add more value to what you bring to their team as well. So, there's a lot of everyone, the buzz around the city is, oh, there's always so much bureaucracy. Everything takes so long. And we short up time on one side, but then we gain length somewhere else. So a perfect example is, in your world, one of the first things on all that we just did a couple of projects with Langan, getting our SWIFT approval takes 6 months. We get the new building approved and objections out in 4 months, but we have to wait and they can't file until we get a number and this and that and we struggle with that, everybody. And it's not that we struggle with it, it's just that the developer can't, or whoever it is, the institution, the client, they can't get started. So tell us a little bit about, like, on the environmental side. I know they keep preaching that they have these expedited reviews and this and that. Tell us a little bit about the reality of that, because sometimes a lot of it is a lot of fluff and there's no substance, right? And sometimes there's little fluff but some great substance. So I'm sure there's some really good things, but I'm sure there's some parts of it that may not be working as well as they thought it would work.
Right. Um, and as I sort of mentioned before, having been on the city side of things, I can speak to both sides of this. I have been the one reviewing ULURP applications, writing ULURP applications, bringing them before the commission, writing and or reviewing seeker applications. So, I believe that there are very legitimate reasons for projects to go through these processes, and it is a
Absolutely.
great check and balance to ensure, that the rules are being followed, the environment is being cared for,
Public
communities are
safety,
being heard,
all of
public
those things.
safety, all of that. But there are things that, you know, there are improvements that can be made. So I think part of it is process improvements, which the city is working on and has been really, diligently working on. And I'm sure we'll talk about a bunch of those. Another aspect of it is, I think, the civil service process and the hiring process and issues with OMB and things like that. So I do hope
And
that
I think that's across the board in
yeah,
all the agencies. We just talked about Swift. You mandate that every site has to file this, hire an engineer, spend money to do it for all the right reasons, right? We don't want this runoff going into the storm drainage. We don't want it going into the street. We want to contain it. We want to make sure it's safe. But hire some people. Why does it take 6 months?
yeah,
That, and again, my show is very pro law. That I'm a big believer in all the zoning laws. I'm a big believer in all the building code laws and the environmental laws. They're there to protect us,
right.
and they're there to protect the people building the jobs. They're there to protect the environment after it's built and during. But somehow there has to find some balance there that these things shouldn't take that long. If
Yeah,
there's
and not
staffing.
to belabor the staffing, because I know probably many of the listeners would just want to hear about process changes. But on the staffing end, as someone who was a manager in several agencies, um, and talking to other people still in the agencies who are pulling their hair out trying to keep good people and hire good people, that system needs
Fails.
significant improvement. And there's a lot of really smart, hardworking people in the city who want to do a good job. Uh,
100%.
but there are bottlenecks that are inevitable when you don't have, um, experienced, trained professionals who are able to continue on in their career at that agency,
And stay.
and stay.
Right.
So that's for another topic. And
It is. It is.
yeah,
It is. Um, but but we've seen some improvement in some places. I always say this, that everyone looks at the 2%, but they don't look at the 98%. I've been, and we spoke about this a year and a half or 2 years ago. Is I think that the change that they did in the zoning with the city of Yes, and making such a, I mean, there are just volumes and volumes of changes. I think that under that administration, they did an incredible job. They
hmm
they and we're in practice in it. We read it every day, Nicole. People come to us every single day. Sister, I have this site. What can I do with the city of Yes? Can I bump it up? Can I do a map change? How do I get more out of my site? And I think the part there is we're not getting a lot of, oh, well, you'll only get more if you give affordable housing. They're co-developing with the concept that that's part of the deal. And I think
hmm
that's when in government that you created the right deal, when private partnership wants
hmm
to do it with you. When
right,
you look at the 485X, and no one wants to build more than 99 units in the program, that portion is not working the way they envisioned it. But the
right.
city of Yes, so far, knock wood, we believe, and our clients, who are, a lot of them are major developers, they feel that it's been very positive. And I'd like your opinion on that, because I know
Yeah.
you've monitored it, for a long time.
No, I agree. I think City of Yes was brilliant. And I think it's brilliant largely for how it was approached politically. And that'll speak to some of the other changes that are coming in 2027 that the city is putting forth. But City of Yes was a citywide proposal. It affected all council
Everywhere.
districts
Right.
across the city of New York. So it wasn't a situation in which, a certain council member didn't like it and it was in their district
Right.
and they could, kind of fight against it and shut it down. It was citywide. And of course, there were negotiations during the ULURP process and, just
As there always is. It
right,
can't be, because if not, then it would just be a mandate.
right,
It wouldn't be a vote. It would be,
right,
you know,
exactly. But yeah, it was citywide and it passed. I think Dan Garodnick, who was the head of city planning for the duration of that project, did a great job
he did a
as
great
somebody,
job.
as a former elected official, right? Who like knows how to communicate with people, knows how to campaign, so he essentially ran a campaign for the City of Yes proposal.
And they broke it into three different parts, right? So
Mhm.
it wasn't just zoning. It was the affordable piece, the energy piece. It
Yeah, it was the
was
energy piece, the economic development piece, which dealt with
right,
kind of antiquated zoning that prevented certain, types of businesses that everybody
right.
would want
Weren't
in their
allowed to be in
area.
districts, which was crazy.
Right, exactly. Um, so yeah, so City of Yes was wonderful, and it speaks to this idea that folks are still combating, not only in New York City but across the country. Everybody has now felt it, whether they feel it themselves or through the next generation, that housing is incredibly expensive.
Oh God,
um,
yeah.
Americans are not able to be homeowners at the rate that they were before or as young as they were before. And we have an aging housing stock, and the production of housing is not keeping up with the need for housing, right? So for most people, you'll talk to them and they agree we should absolutely build more housing, but nobody wants it near their house.
Of
Nobody wants it
course,
in their neighborhood. So if that's the issue, and that's what's happening in every neighborhood, then where is it getting built?
it's
Um,
not
it's not, right?
right.
So I think step one here was, in recent years, was getting City of Yes put forward, which of course gave a little bit more floor area, reduced parking requirements in many
Right.
cases, and other things, adjusted
Well, and
use
the one
groups.
thing that I growing up in Queens, right? I grew up in Astoria, and I always used to say, there's this wide street, there's buses and the train 5 blocks away. How is it possible that the density is so low,
Hmm.
right? So, I think that a really big part of City of Yes that just not from a business side, but just from being an architect, going to architecture school, loving the city, is that they did a really good job to recognize, and I hate to say it this way, but some common sense principles of why
Hmm.
zoning should change in certain
Hmm.
places. If you
Yeah.
have the transportation and you have the wider streets and you need housing in those districts, it they really did a great job with it.
Hmm.
And usually we're always beating the city up about what a terrible job they did, but in this particular case, I really believe that, and there's more to do. There's a lot more to do because some districts just got nothing. And there's
Right.
certain hubs, there's certain hubs like outside of Bay Ridge, and they, that there's like everyone meets at this one place, and yet they didn't get a bump up in their density. It stayed the same. So it's never going to be perfect, right, Nicole? It's always got to have. You're never going to paint the perfect picture the first time around. But
Mhm.
so tell us a little bit about what's coming out in this in the affordable expedited section of the ULURP for 2027, because I think there's a lot of buzz to that.
Right. So, for those New York City residents who remember, in November 2025, there were ballot measures that voters could, you know, click yes or no. One of them was related to creating uh, modifications to the city charter, specifically pertaining to the ULURP process, such that projects that contain affordable housing would have a modified review process under ULURP.
So
It wasn't.
just stay there for a second. So if you go to ULURP and you ask, so would it be appropriate to ask for a map change for higher density? Maybe is that something that would go through ULURP?
Right. Right. So if you want to change the zoning district of a certain block, right, that triggers ULURP, which needs has a whole pre-certification process where you're kind of
Community board.
getting all the technical documents, and then the official ULURP process starts, which involves the community board has 60 days to review, then the borough president another 30 days. Then it goes to the city planning commission. There's a public hearing. Then it goes to the city council. Um, and that's kind of the final vote at the
Yeah,
city council. And
a
then
year
the
later,
mayor,
right? A
yeah,
year
and
later,
then the mayor
you have
can
it.
veto. Um, but typically that doesn't happen. But as I was sort of referring to earlier, when there is a ULURP application, say for a zoning change for a property or a group of properties in a neighborhood, um, historically at the city council, council members have practiced council member deference, so they defer to the council member of the district within which the project is being proposed. So if that council member is completely against the rezoning, say for a higher density
Right,
project,
dies.
then it dies. Or in many cases, which you wouldn't even hear about, someone it doesn't even attempt that rezoning in that council
Oh
member's
no,
district.
that and it's funny how that just I've heard that over the years, and now it seems that there's this renewed energy that if that one district member is opposed to it, it's not just going to get thrown in the trash can and the developer bails or the owner bails. They now are going to have a process where it's not just that deferring allows a different process. So tell us a
Right.
little bit about that.
Right. So the idea that the city has put out thus far is, well, so these ballot measures passed. And so the idea is that some criteria will be created by the city. And I understand we should hear about more specifics about that in the fall of this year, where we will better understand which 12 council districts throughout the city of New York have produced the least amount of affordable housing in the past X
So
number of
so they're going
years.
to actually use math. They're actually going to use
Yes,
math to do this.
yes. So math
That's
is
very smart.
important.
Right.
Math is important. Um, so those 12 districts will be published, and over time those 12 districts may change, right? If a bunch of new affordable housing gets placed in a certain district, then those 12 districts, they're not going to
Yeah,
stay
they
the
move
same
up
forever.
they move up the food chain and somebody else
Exactly.
drops back. Got it.
Exactly. So the name for this that they're calling it right now is an affordable housing fast track for fair housing. Um, I am on the private sector side these days, so I'm not technically working on this, but I follow it closely.
Of course.
So I think, legally, this is relying on the Fair Housing Act, where every community has to have their fair share, right? So you
Right.
can't put, all the whatever garbage incinerating facilities in
Right.
only one area. Like you have to kind
Right.
of spread the
Spread
good
it
and the
out.
bad
Right.
throughout the city. You have to just spread it out, fair share, fair housing. So if any rezonings like we just talked about, are proposed in any of these 12 districts that have produced the least amount of affordable housing in the city, there will be a truncated ULURP process. So the timeline will be truncated. And I don't know the specifics of this, but I know that the idea is that the
To
council member,
incentivize.
the council member deference, where the local council member can essentially kill a project, will not be able to happen any longer, as long as, the city hall and others are behind and support the rezoning or the project.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if sometimes, Nicole, some of my audience, we do this for a living, so we know all of this stuff. But
Right.
sometimes just to break it down in smaller terms, and just it never made sense to me that you have an administration that's saying we need more housing. Everywhere we go to the building Congress, we go to the AIA, we go here. Every platform, every networking, every seminar we go to, they everyone starts with, well, the city needs 500,000 more units, right? So you have an administration that says, hey, look, we need more units. But then you have a system that says, well, if that district doesn't want it, they were able to defer it, right? They were able
Mhm.
to not vote on it. They were able to just. So I think that this allows at least a more fair, we talk about fair housing. Well, this is fair. I want more housing. I'm a proponent, but I don't want it in my backyard. So you know what? Let District 1 do it. I'm in District 3. So um, I want to give a real example. So you have a zoning lot in Queens. It's a very low density. It's an R3 or an R4. It's on a wide street. Somebody did a map change a couple of blocks away. You're not that far from it. This owner now decides, well, you know what? Maybe now's the time for me to get a map change and for me to get a commercial overlay, for me to get a community facility, and for me
Yeah.
to get higher density for residential. But the part of that is when you apply for that map change, you have to participate in giving back a percentage, 30% maybe, of the units to be affordable units. So
Right.
there's the incentive. And what you're saying now is in those districts, if you propose that and you're in one of the 12 and they need it, they
Yes.
should be able to partner, and I use that word a lot, the city and the private, to say, hey, we got a good deal here. You need units, we want them, give them to you, but help us get this going faster. So
Hmm.
is that like in a layperson's terms, is that really what the path is and the concept?
Right. It's like if you're willing to do the work to go through a rezoning, which by the way will still include an environmental review
Of
under
course, you're
seeker.
not bypassing certain things.
Right. So that environmental review will still study all of the things that it will have has always studied and should study. Is there sufficient open space in the area for the new residents, school seats? Will there
Right.
be impacts to traffic such that kind of the signals need to be changed, or a new light needs to go in another place,
Sure.
or sidewalks need to be widened for pedestrians? Whatever comes from that environmental review, that will still happen, right? People are not just approving this willy nilly without
Of course.
doing a full analysis. But yes, if you are willing to go through that, such that you're essentially upzoning a property that then requires a 25%, 30% set aside of units for income restricted housing, then and you're in an area that historically has not produced affordable housing, then this will be a
Then it's
much
a bonus for both sides.
faster and I wouldn't say a sure thing, but that's what they're trying to create, I believe, is
Well,
Before it was like if the community board hates this stuff and the council member hates this
they,
stuff, don't even bother, don't waste your money.
right. And Nicole, I can't tell you in the 40 years that I've been practicing this, how many phone calls I've been on the private side with land use attorneys in there, and I would recommend them to a client, and the land use attorney would say, "What district are you in?" "Oh, forget it. They don't want it." Unless it's a community facility and it's something related
Yeah,
to
they want to prove it.
they won't approve it. And it was dead before you even had the conversation. Where I
Yeah.
think now the opportunity is there to have the private side feel like it's not an automatic no. And I
Mm-hmm.
think they've created that optimism. Now they got to come through with it in January of 2027.
Mm-hmm.
That, like you said, that now you got the plan. You're gonna get this. You're gonna get these 12 districts, and when these developers or these owners apply, they got to make sure it crosses the finish line.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, like, I understand that it can be scary to some folks, to some community boards. Change is scary, right? But only constant is change. City has always changed. It's always changing. Um, and in some neighborhoods, it would be nice for there to be more brand new apartments for, say seniors to downsize to within their own
Sure.
neighborhood and maybe pass their way too big house for what
Well,
they
and
need
and
these
and I
days.
remember a conversation that you and I had, that when you were, uh, I believe at your company before, or maybe when you were in the public side, that you actually represented the neighborhood.
Hmm.
So you get to see both sides. You're not just trying to get the up zone. You're you're also you also have this, you know, you've had a career where you got to hear the people side too of
Right.
those neighborhoods, and what those people felt and how they felt with these changes. But to me, it's astonishing that I looked at the zoning resolution for, until a few years ago, from when it was created in 1961. It's pretty
Hmm.
much been a lot of the same, unless you went to city planning and they redistricted a specific place. But this change was a citywide change. It was a massive change. It was a
Hmm.
massive change. Um, as always, there's always good and bad with everything. What do you think the biggest positive that's going to come out of this affordable, um, expedited, fair housing plan?
I think that some neighborhoods will get much needed development. I think that the people who are sometimes very politically um, active or have the loudest voices don't always necessarily represent their whole community.
Correct.
I think people desperately need housing in the city, especially income restricted housing, where they have a little bit more confidence that their rent is not going to just skyrocket a year after their lease, and then they're going to be back, doubling up with family or trying to figure out their next move, and then they can stay in the city that they grew up in or that they have their family in or jobs in.
Sure.
um, so
And not
I
and
think
not
it's going to
and
be.
not what one of the things that's happened, in Long Island City and Greenpoint, um, you know, like Long Island City was more manufacturing, but in Greenpoint there was some sections where there were just people that lived there for 50 years, and they just can't afford to live there anymore because it's too expensive.
Mhm.
Because it went from this to, huge buildings, high rents, and the neighborhood got transformed very quickly. Um, but I think through this type of program,
Mhm.
you're specifically looking at a specific site, not a whole neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
So, that's a big difference, because maybe this site is more closer to the manufacturing side, and it's really a great fit because it's not really in the middle of where all the one family houses are, or the two families. It's a little like in Queens, it's a little bit off to the side, but it
Mhm.
has wide street, it's got the trains, it's got everything. That's where it belongs. It
Yeah,
doesn't belong on a side street on a dead end in Maspeth. I
right.
get it. I get it. So uh, I I look, I always I never realized this till a few years ago until I had the podcast of how many great people that I met that are urban planners that are in, just the vision of New York City of what it could be and being part of those changes that how much government and private have to partner to make these changes. Because
Always, always.
if it's just government, it doesn't work, and if it's just private, it doesn't work. But when they can come up with a great idea together, it really they're going to make some great changes if they could both make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, so this, I mean, I think this is something that a lot of folks don't even understand yet. I think, there's articles out there about what those 12 districts might be. I would say if any of your listeners, are curious about this and want to learn more, myself or my team is always more than happy to
We
have a
appreciate that.
conversation about it, or if there's a group, like a professional group that wants a little bit more information on this so far, that would be great. I
Yeah,
know that.
absolutely. Any of the listeners could put a comment in. You subscribe. Be more than happy to put you in contact with Nicole, especially uh, if you have properties that you think there's the potential for them to be upzoned. Um, by all means, reach out. We could give you
Mhm.
some strategy. Nicole could give you some strategy. So Nicole, always at towards the tail end of the show, we always talk about, the rear view mirror is tiny, but the windshield is big. We talked a little bit about the future of, housing. On the environmental side, just tell us a little bit about what you think these new plans that they have. I know obviously if they don't staff it, it speeds up and slows down. But assuming that the city can get some staffing, um, what do you think next year brings for the environmental reviews across the board in New York City?
Yeah, well, I'll do a little bit rear view and front view,
Perfect.
just
Perfect.
because the city put forth a new process for certain projects that meet certain criteria. I won't go into it. Can have sort of a truncated environmental review. So instead of the full seeker environmental assessment statement, the project can do what's called a green fast track memo. There's certain information that needs to be put into that memo.
As long as you as long as you fall into as long as you hit certain criteria to be in that
Correct.
program. Got
Correct.
you.
And still disclosing information about the project. It's still very much like a document that the public can read and understand what's going on. But the project, typically the change is so negligible that it doesn't merit this, you know, year and a half, 200,000, $300,000 document, that most projects, going through
So
rezoning,
that's pretty
and that's on
substantial.
the lower end, right? Like
Right.
for more significant projects, it can be a lot more. So, I mean, that's something I think a lot of people don't understand either, is that 200,000, 300,000 that somebody's paying for an analysis and a document is money that's not going into the
Into the
building.
project.
Right. And so it affects, how much everything costs overall. So, we have had a few projects here where the project has qualified for a green fast track memo. I would say again, like because of the staffing issues, I think it didn't save a ton of time, but it definitely saved a ton of money.
Well,
Um,
that's a win,
I
right?
think it's a
That's a win.
win. It's a win for, and again, we're trying to spark new housing and development. So if we can kind of take some of these burdens off of the people who are trying to produce this housing, every little bit like that helps.
Well, it just lets the the pencil to paper work out, because if
Hmm.
it's a few $100,000 here and a few $100,000 there, $1 million goes quick when you're developing
Right.
larger projects. It's
And then at the state level, Governor Hochul has committed to reforms to the state seeker process, saying that kind of developments under 500 units may qualify. I think there's going to be still more stipulations to what that is. Maybe they have to, you know, use renewable energy or, I don't know if it's going to be across the board, but we'll see in the coming months what that's going to look like. And that should help development, throughout the state as well, because though similar to what I was saying about the ULURP process in New York City, I think a lot of
same thing outside of the,
townships and cities
well, like
outside of New York City
I've seen
use,
it. I've seen it up in the country in Middletown, New York. All of
yeah.
a sudden, my wife and I go to dinner, and there's all brand new affordable buildings in right in town. So,
Mhm.
it's not just New York City. This is throughout the state. And
Right.
whether you're in Middletown, New York, or Liberty, New York, which is a little quiet town, they're getting
Hmm.
affordable housing because there's incentives for the government and the private sector to build together. I mean, that
Hmm.
and it works. It
Hmm.
works. Well, this was awesome. Great to
Nice.
see you, Nicole.
Nice to see
Congratulations. A
you.
year and a half has passed already at Langan. Uh,
Thank you.
say hello to everyone at Langan for me. Thank you for taking your time out. And look forward to having you back next year after 2027.
Yeah.
We'll see how this all works out.